Hello, everyone. Welcome from all the corners of the globe in which you're joining us from. We very much appreciate you spending the time today as we take you through what will be a really good session on creating value, mitigating risk, and tackling food system externalities. I'm Diane Holdorf, and I am the Managing Director of our Food and Nature program at WBCSD. I'll be taking you through our session here this afternoon, and we'll be introducing to you shortly our other session speakers, talking to you a little bit about what to expect, and then kicking off our session. We're very excited to have a great lineup of people to be joining us today who are going to be sharing some very detailed experience with you that'll set the context for how we really incorporate risk and externalities in light of current events in our work going forward. We're really pleased to welcome Scarlett Benson from Systemic, Rodney Irwin, who leads the Redefining Value program at WBCSD, Emily Grady, who is on the WBCSD Fresh team and is leading our work on the true value of food, Ravi Epewardana from OLAM, who's part of that true value of food work and will be talking with you about how OLAM has been internalizing those costs of the externalities into their financial and strategic planning. Clea Kaskakuk and Jamie Morrison will then join us. Clea from the WBCSD Policy and Advocacy team, and Jamie, Director of the Food System Program for FAO and part of the Food System Summit Secretariat. They'll be taking us through a few more discussion points around how we bring this all to life. Each speaker will have the opportunity to introduce themselves when they start as they take us through these different parts of the agenda. We will be talking about first the hidden costs of the global food and land use systems and how we start to capture the $12 trillion that represents. We'll then move on to the dynamic risk assessment tools and what that can teach us about agri-food sector risks and managing those risks to create opportunities. Then we'll speak about multi-capital accounting and lessons from OLAM as they've incorporated this from their finance and sustainability team, and how we bring the learnings and fast accelerated incorporation of these externalities into our work to and through the Food System Summit. We will have time for discussion and Q&A, but we do encourage everyone to use the chat function throughout the discussions to really capture your thinking as we go. More on that in just a moment. First, just a quick note on WBCSD. Many of you are here, know us extremely well as members and partners, but we exist to help ensure a more sustainable future, leading as businesses. With over 200 members today and numerous critically important partners, including many of those that are on the call with us today, we are united around a common vision in which 9 billion people can live well within planetary boundaries by 2050. And we cut that into near-term requirements for our work. If you go on to the next slide, it talks about all of the different companies who are part of our work here together. Everybody's got an important contributing role to play. And we're doing this work across 6 big economic systems. Those systems are part of how we bring this work to life across sectors and across big themes, working on circular economy, cities and mobility, climate and energy, and on people and the SDGs. What we'll be speaking to you about today is bringing this together, in particular from 2 of our program areas, food and nature and redefining value. We'll show you what it means when we connect the dots on these really important systems and how we think about financializing and making more positive results through our sustainable work in food and land use and nature. A couple of key points. Virtual meetings are everybody's new normal as we work through response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Within WBCSD, we're really pleased to be able to bring you a number of key events each week for you to listen, learn, contribute, and apply. Please do visit this website for more information on those sessions coming up. A couple of points about today. The session is being recorded, and we will be, yes, sharing a recording of this session. John, thanks for that note, and Matt for your response there. We'll be sharing a recording of the session, the slides, and a number of other resources that we will be referring to throughout the discussions here today. All participants are muted so that you can best hear all of our speakers. Please, as I said, let's use the chat function to keep our discussions moving forward. If you've got something you want to raise, though, please put your hand up using that function through the participants button at the bottom of your toolbox at the bottom of your screen. And we will have time at the end for Q&A. So we'll be reviewing at that point the questions that come up during the chat function, and at that point be able to take other questions as well. With that, I do want to remind everybody that we work in a pre-competitive way. So every time we start our meetings like this, we have to also start with an antitrust statement to remind us that we have no intention of getting into competitively sensitive discussions at any point. If we hear that, we'll stop it. If you hear it and have concerns, let us know so that we can take that action as well. We will make sure to avoid that in our conversations here today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Scarlett, who will take us through the hidden costs, how we get after these $12 trillion that they've identified that exist within the global food and land use system. Scarlett, thanks, and over to you.
Thank you, Diane. Hi, everybody. My name is Scarlett Benson, and I'm an associate at Systemic, but I'm also the program manager of the Food and Land Use Coalition, which Systemic and WBCSD are two of the 9 core partners. So I'm here to talk to you today about the hidden costs, which featured within the Growing Better report, as well as the Food System Economics Commission, which we're launching with the EAT Foundation and the Potsdam Institute on Climate Impact Research. So on this slide here, you can see a beautiful pyramid, which this is the kind of key infographic from the Growing Better report, which FOLU published in September last year. So the Growing Better report is essentially the first integrated global assessment of the social, economic, and health benefits of transforming our food and land use systems. And within that report, we actually identified that there isn't a systemic level trade-off between outcomes relating to the environment, to human health, inclusive development, and enhanced security, food security. We describe a systemic perform agenda, which is applied through these 10 critical transitions, which you can see within the pyramid. So at the top, you have healthy diets, and then on the bottom, you have all the way through to gender and demography. And we argue that each of these 10 critical transitions are essential in driving the transition of the food system for these outcomes that I mentioned before. And you know, if we do pursue all of those 10 transitions, there is a huge economic prize valued at 5.7 trillion a year by 2030 in avoided damage to people and planet. And it's, you know, a minuscule amount of in terms of the investment cost. So 300 to 350 billion a year investment cost. So you have an ROI of more than 15 times there. And then finally, which I think is just important to mention since we're on a WBCSD call, is that we also identify $4.5 trillion a year to 2030 in business opportunity associated with these transitions. So it's all in all a hugely positive story. If we go to the next slide. So Diane mentioned these 12 trillion of hidden costs associated with the food system. And this really is the image which people seem to of whenever we present it at international events, because I think it really captures quite neatly the problem that we're facing with food systems. So you have on the left-hand side, the market value of the global food system at $10 trillion. And then as we move to the right, you can see these different buckets of hidden costs, so health, environment, and economic, which leads essentially overall to the kind of the net costs of the food system at minus 2 trillion. So this is interesting because I think it, you know, when people say that the food system is broken, this is quite a neat way of showing, well, look, something isn't adding up here. There's all these inefficiencies and externalities within the system. I think for me as well, I come from an environmental background, so seeing that the health bucket is the largest source of hidden costs at 6.6 trillion was quite shocking, and a large, about 2/3 of that is related to malnutrition. So, you know, does taking a health lens on the food system as opposed to potentially an environmental lens, give us an opportunity to really kind of reshape the narrative and engage with potentially audiences that weren't interested previously when we were talking about the environment. Now, one thing I do want to just touch on here, which I think is sort of a mission, is that we, within the health bucket, you can see pollution, pesticides, antimicrobial resistance, obesity, and undernutrition. But we didn't have anything in there when we did this analysis last year around, the risk of zoonotic diseases. And we do know that human encroachment on nature, for example, for land conversion for food production, is increasing human, wildlife, and domestic animal interactions, and therefore cross-species interactions with pathogens such as COVID-19. So, even what could be the biggest cost of all isn't even captured on this. If you go to the next slide, please. So in terms of what's going to happen in the future, so we have 10 trillion of hidden costs now. What we did in the Food and Land Use Coalition, we worked with one of our other core partners, the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, to model 2 scenarios. So one of those scenarios, we continue along current trends. There are some improvements in terms of efficiency gains and productivity, but all in all, nothing significantly shifts. And then we modeled a sort of better future scenario where we were targeting those 4 outcomes I mentioned earlier: environment, health, food security, and better inclusive development. And what we can see here is that the hidden costs will continue to rise along current trends, and we will see a significant reduction in those hidden costs if we take this better future scenario. So that economic prize is essentially the difference by 2030 or 2050 in those 2 numbers. It's 5.7 trillion of economic prize by 2030 and 10.5 by 2050. Can you go to the next slide, please? So why is this hidden cost analysis useful? What does it tell us? And importantly, what are the limitations in it? So the FOLU assessment of hidden costs refers to negative externalities and inefficiencies. So we don't adopt a sort of strict economic definition of externalities within our analysis. We're looking at kind of a bit of a mix of different things. So we look at abatement costs, social costs, productivity losses, or sort of lost economic value from the inefficient resource use. So by no means are we necessarily comparing, like for like within all these buckets, but it's a pretty good depiction of the magnitude of these costs across the system. But it's in no way a final answer. And we know that there are many organizations that we worked closely with in sort of defining the snapshot of the food system that have been spending years and years developing methodologies for us to get a more accurate understanding of these externalities within the food system. So we do need a lot more work to get a more accurate number, but I think the value of the hidden costs was to demonstrate this is a huge number. And I think for businesses, what's particularly interesting about it is in recognizing that there may well be at some point a market correction, and therefore this is a sort of, could also present a regulatory risk. And also, can we reframe these hidden costs as future market opportunities? As I mentioned before, there's 4.5 trillion in business opportunities that we identified associated with those 10 critical transitions. So, recognizing all of these limitations, what is FOLU doing to, better improve our understanding of externalities and inefficiencies within the food system? Well, we are setting up another commission, so it's called the Food Systems Economic Commission, and we'll be working with the EAT Foundation and the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, PIC, to set up this commission. It was soft launched in Davos last year. And it will really build on the work of the Growing Better report in sort of 2 main ways. So the first being broadening the impacts to a wider set of metrics, as well as beyond monetary valuation, and then deepening the analysis of the pathways. So, for example, we're looking at explicit nitrogen pathways, and then we'll also be looking at how we can better understand the livelihood impacts of a more inclusive transition. If you go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit more information here on the Food Systems Economic Commission. So the vision is that it seeks to equip leading political and economic decision makers with the evidence to swiftly advance the transition towards healthy, inclusive, sustainable and food systems. We really want to give them the tools to really understand in a bit more detail some of the transition economics associated with the food and land use transformation that we describe within the Growing Better report. It is an academic commission, so it's independent, and all of the commissioners, of which there are about 20 at the moment, are from interdisciplinary backgrounds. It's chaired by Ravi Kamba, Otmar, Edenhofer and Vera Songve. Other commissioners include Naoko Ishii from the University of Tokyo, Schengen Fan from the Chinese Agricultural University, Maximo Torero from the FAO, Nick Stern from London School of Economics. So, you know, we've got a good representation from across the globe and from various different academic backgrounds. In terms of the, you know, really what we're trying to understand, it does go a bit beyond just the question of, you know, understanding the externalities and taking this hidden cost analysis further. So we've defined it around our kind of, you know, our focus around 4 key questions. The first is in how do food systems perform today on health, environment, inclusion, and where are they heading? So that's really kind of refining the hidden cost analysis that I showed you before. Where do we want to go? And then what does the transition towards sustainable food systems look like? And I think importantly here, we're keen to identify some very concrete waypoints for the food system transition, as well as plausible and achievable targets for both 2030 and 50. And within that, what we're keen to do is identify targets for technological development, behavioural change, as well as food system organisation. So broader than just quantitative targets. And then finally, the 4th question is, what is preventing a sustainability transition for food systems, and how can these lock-ins be addressed? So here we'll be using agent-based modelling to identify different policy mixes, which will lead to optimal outcomes. And importantly, we will be doing deep dives on the 5 FOLU countries where we have platforms, which are Ethiopia, Colombia, Indonesia, China and India. We do also work in other countries as part of FOLU, the Food and Land Use Coalition, but those are the ones where we have partner-led platforms. We have better engagement there. So this is very much about making this real and making policymakers, you know, giving examples of success, etc. The timeline, so I mentioned before that we had the soft launch in Davos, but the interim findings we're hoping to publish at the end of at the Food System Summit in 2021, and then there'll be a final peer-reviewed publication which we'll be working with Spring in Nature that will be coming out in 2023. We go to the final slide. So I won't go into any more detail on the different work streams that underpin the Food Systems Economic Commission, but they address those 4 questions I outlined earlier. So between FOLU and PIC, we'll be leading those 2 work streams. What I really wanted to draw your attention to here is just that both of these are underpinned by an engagement strategy. We haven't yet really established exactly how we want to and how we think it's best to engage with the business community. So that is really still open to be shaped, and we're really hoping to get feedback from you guys and indeed from WBCSE on the best way to do this. You know, I think the target really is around sort of national policymakers, but we want to make sure that the tools that we produce are useful and relevant for business as well. So the engagement strategy as it stands is focused around participating in global events, and I mentioned before the Food Systems Summit, which is a key one for us, obviously. The second one is around, you know, really supporting the commissioners to be the champions. So many of them have their own public and private sector engagement and media opportunities. So we'll be looking to share the findings from the commission through that. I mentioned also that the work that we'll be doing with those 5 particular countries, China, Colombia, Ethiopia, India and Indonesia. So there'll be specific national regional stakeholder engagement in those countries. And then finally, which I also mentioned, we'll be working with Springer Nature to ensure that we're engaging thoroughly with academia. This will be a peer-reviewed publication. So yeah, I mean, this, as I say, this is an academic commission, but we're really keen to make sure that we're not just, you know, going off on some academic endeavor, and that what we produce is really, really valuable for policymakers and businesses in trying to understand some of these sort of trade-offs and linkages, you know, within their own countries or within their own businesses. So very happy to answer any questions later, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Scarlett, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I'm Rodney Irwin, and as Diane has already introduced me, I'm going to jump straight in to the topic of risk management. It was Albert Einstein that said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. And today I want to explore with you, in albeit 10 minutes, an opportunity for us to think outside the box when it comes to our relationship with the process of risk management. And to start our conversation, I would just want to refer to this diagram that you see on the slide that many of you will be familiar with. Now, this is the very, very, very high level summary of a 102-page document produced by the World Economic Forum that is published every year in January, just in advance of the annual meeting in Davos. And what this slide is depicting is what the World Economic Forum and its partners believe to be the principal material and likely risks to affect all of us on the planet. If we look at the progression of these risks over the last 11 years, we can see that we are moving away from a time when economic risks dominated the conversation to ones that are dominated in 2020 by environmental risks. I should say that this was published just after the first indication of a new respiratory illness was emerging in China on the 31st of December. But just notice, if you go back to 2009, health was a consideration. Chronic disease made it into the top 5 at both impact and likelihood. Now, most people will never read the risk report of the World Economic Forum, but if you did, you would see that infectious diseases were there, but they didn't make the top 5, and they were only considered to be impactful in the next 10 years. There was no indication that they would happen with the speed and with the impact that they have had. So therefore, one needs to question our ability to predict the future and whether or not we as human beings are equipped, even with the best intentions in the world, to understand that our own predictive powers are somewhat limited. So bringing it back to today's topic, I was very curious as somebody that worked in risk management in my previous life as to why business leaders didn't necessarily embrace these challenges. And the World Economic Forum and many others have been telling us that these risks are emerging and that they are impactful. And they're, you know, let's look at COVID-19. It has destroyed 40 to 50% of our understanding of economic value in the last few months. But I was curious as to why does risk management professionals and why do those that govern risk management fail to address this in the way in which they manage businesses? So if we go to the next slide, we started some research to understand what really is going on between the sustainable development community, which is advocating that we need to address environmental, social, and governance impacts and dependencies and pursue the opportunities that the development agenda presents, and the realities of what we see in business disclosures, which may or may not include environmental and social governance risks in the risk factors that companies are required in many jurisdictions by law to disclose. So we did some research in 2015, 2016, and it resulted in the publication you see here. And what we found was really quite sobering and a little bit unpleasant, in that we looked at the WBCSD members, and one might argue that the WBCSD membership is made up of progressive business. And we found of the 170 companies that we looked at, only 1 in 3 of the risks identified by the business in their materiality assessment and disclosed in their sustainability report were reflected in the communication to investors through the annual report. And there was an average of 1 in 3 chances. It was actually 29% alignment. But what was more disturbing is that we found that only 8% of 170 companies were actually fully aligned. 57% had partial alignment, and further analysis confirmed that to be where there was a legal requirement to disclose. But 35% had no alignment whatsoever. And that got me wondering as to why was this disconnect real? Remember that World Economic Forum and other authoritative sources have been telling us that these risks are coming, but yet we're not seeing that reflected in risk management practices as demonstrated through their disclosures in external publications. So we followed this research up with triangulation of the research by discussions with over 30 companies, and we identified a number of reasons why this was happening. One very simple one is that sustainability and risk management didn't even know each other existed. But at the other extreme, where they did know that they were complementary activities, they still didn't know how to embrace the possibilities of working collaboratively because language was a barrier, or the risk management community didn't know how to factor these externalities into their risk management processes. And if they did even do that, then the concept of probability meant that many of these risks never made it to management potential because they were seen as remote or unlikely. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, is that predicting the future is futile. What we need to be able to do is manage the future when it comes to us. So we need to move away from obsessing on risk management and look at resilience. And our reaction and solution to this is presented in the next slide. So based with this research, we went to the world's leading risk management organization. That's the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, affectionately known as COSO, who are the authors of the world's most widely used risk management framework. And together with them and our partners EY, we developed application guidance on applying enterprise risk management to ESG-related risks. And this quite extensive publication that mirrors the 5 components of the COSO framework was launched in 2018 at WBCSD's meeting in Singapore. And since then, over 100 companies have already implemented the guidance as part of their work. But today, I'm going to focus in on chapter 3B. And 3B really is helping you look at new ways of looking at risk management. Of course, governance, strategy, performance, review and revision information are all important. But if I can do anything today to get you to think about divorcing your obsession with probability and embracing the potentials of vulnerability, then job done. So let's get into what we have been doing with our member companies. And these are those that have been involved in this research that we have conducted. So to bring chapter 3B to life, KPMG approached WBCSD, one of our very valuable members, and said, would you be interested in helping us show that chapter 3B of your guidance can be more enlightening? And we said, sure. So together with the food and nature companies that you see on the screen, we've worked together to produce a publication that we launched at Davos earlier this year, which shows that if you think differently, you don't get the same results. You actually get more information that allows you to make better decisions. And if we're going to unlock the potential and address the problems that Charlotte has already described, and if we're going to encourage more companies to disclose better information that we will see shortly from Ravi and the team at Olam, then we need to start behaving differently about the way we view how we identify the impacts and dependencies that we have. So let's get into the findings of what we found. In the next slide, you'll see a very traditional risk management metrics. Since the 1990s, when risk management became a formalized process that businesses had to do, we always looked at risk through the lens of impact and likelihood. And during the study that we conducted with KPMG's new model, we still have this 2 dimensions as an illustration. So this is the very traditional way. And if you look at what's the big risk here, The big risks are regulation and social media. And they're highlighted on the screen to show that those would be the risks that, generally speaking, a traditional risk management approach would advocate that those discharged with governance focus attention on. But that is so last season, and it is really giving us wrong information. If we look at what Charlotte just presented, there's potential, there's opportunity that the food sector needs to address. And it's not coming out of this process. So what do we need to do to bring this alive within an organization? So within the DRA, or the Dynamic Risk Assessment methodology that KPMG developed, there are a number of other factors that we need to bring to consideration. I'm going to take you quickly through those now. Trust me, there's no replacement for today for reading the publication. It is a page turner, recommend it. So given that you're mostly in lockdown, and if not at home, you have plenty of time. So let's get you started on looking at the potential of changing your risk management activity. So on the next slide, we're getting a new insight here. The dynamic risk assessment looks at impact, likelihood, connectivity, and velocity of risk. So it's no longer just a two-dimensional mirror. And what we see here is that when we start looking at connectivity, we're starting to see clusters. And here we see clusters emerge that were not in the two-dimensional frame. A cluster is defined as anything that is 3 or more risks that are connected in such a way that one impacts the other. In this particular example, we identified 2 major risk clusters. And 58% of the participants, I think there was around 36 people across the 9 companies that took part, identified this as being material clusters. And they are the inefficiency of production practices, land degradation, and nitrogen inefficiency. And the second cluster was inefficient production practices, land degradation, and water. So it's worth noting that if we take a more holistic view of the industry's risk universe, sustainability risks are emerging as probably the most important, not social media and not regulation and isolation. The second insight in the next slide is for what many would consider to be the one that's the most valuable insight. This rank orders the most influential risks. These are the risks that are most interconnected with the rest of the network, meaning should something happen to them, either positively or negatively, we will see the effect ripple throughout the rest of the network, which also means that these are our biggest levers to impact the risks facing the industry. And for us, we identified 3 levers: was understanding agricultural practices, regulation, and inefficient production practices. And just as you know, we also looked at the raw data, and the first one, the biggest impact here, the biggest lever for change, was understanding agricultural practices. And that was significantly more influential than the other 2, but in all 3 of them are nonetheless significant. The third insight in the next slide is also looking at those risks that are, we've looked at the risks that are most influential. We now need to look at the most influenced risks, or the risks that are most likely to be triggered by other risks being triggered within the network. And an easy way of looking at this is for anybody that's ever had the misfortune of taking public transport at rush hour. Let's use the London Underground as an example. If for some reason you find yourself in a station that has a problem where multiple rails come together, so for example, where, let's say, a Bank station in London, one problem in one train can have a massive impact on the whole network. And that's sort of what we see in this slide. So what we see here is that there are 3 risks that in combination are really influenced. And that is inefficient production practices again, ill-conceived regulation, not just regulation, but ill-conceived regulation, and land degradation. Those are where the killer blows reside in the risk management practices. The fourth insight, very quickly, is also on speed of onset, or velocity, as we see. So being able to manage risk is one thing. Being able to manage it within the time available for that risk suddenly presenting itself until it's at its full catastrophic impact is important. And a good example here is a tsunami. Once you see the water going out, you know it's going to come back. How long you have to recover from that first sight of the water going out is the difference between survival and not survival. So here we see the importance of speed of onset or velocity. The dotted line marks the average velocity, which we have calculated in this exercise of being 28 months. In line with previous engagements that KPMG actually took, this is in fact quite similar. The longest potential risk here is going to be a 28-month window to resolve. And in the great scale of things, that's not a lot of time. So given that we have now demonstrated that if you just rely on this two-dimensional view of risk, you're going to end up managing the unimportant. You're going to be spending time on social media strategies that really are not the issue. So in summary, in the next slide, once we identify risk clusters, we're able to calculate the aggregate impact and also the time of impact. As we can see, the impact of both risk clusters is greater than the individual severe risks. Now, that really changes the conversation in the boardroom. So if you are a risk manager or a sustainability professional and you go and say, we need to focus on risks related to social media, or we need to do something about regulation, you're misinforming the board, and therefore you are not giving those discharged with governance the opportunity to take advantage of the opportunities that Scarlett has presented. So our own processes, if we keep doing them, as Einstein has said time and time again, if we keep doing what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got, and we'll probably go insane in the process. So I know this slide builds up a little bit, so bear with as we flick through everything. Social media and regulation, not the big problem. The problem is water, land degradation, understanding agricultural practices. And this comes from 9 different companies who collectively came up with this identification of new risks. So these are things that we really need to go away and think about. Not only these risks, but the process that we use to identify. So in the next slide, we'll summarize how potentially you can embrace this new opportunity. So how do you take this on board in your company? Well, the answer is reasonably simple. Have a look at the report that we published. You can find the link here, but also take advantage of the opportunity that currently presents itself with WBCSD's Redefining Value team and our partners, EY, PwC, and ERM, being able to offer you training on how to implement this methodology within your own organization. KPMG's methodology is publicly available. It's one of the many opportunities that you could have to bring Chapter 3B to life. There are others, but if you wanted to get advice on how to overhaul your risk management practices, make them more future focused and externality inclusive, then you know where to find us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rodney. This is Emily Grady speaking. I'm with WBCSD's Food and Nature program. I specifically work on our True Value of Food project. And I'm going to, actually, before I jump into my remarks, Rodney, I'll just comment that there are a few questions directed to your presentation in the chat that maybe either we could respond in the chat or we could take them up during our discussion at the end of the session, but just wanted to flag that. Thanks to everyone for engaging through the chat. It's great to see the level of interest in this work. So as I was saying, I lead our True Value of Food work, and I'm going to first just share a few sort of an overview of what we do within this project, and then I'm going to hand the floor over to Ravi Abhiwardana from Olam, who is also deeply engaged in our True Value of Food work. He's a co-leader of this work, and he'll talk through some really interesting examples of how multi-capital accounting is applied within Olam. So just to jump in quickly, so within True Value of Food, we really encourage companies to measure and value their impacts and dependencies. And this is indeed related to the COSO framework that Rodney shared earlier. This is a key step within that process, as well as we believe that by a better understanding of measurement and valuation of impacts and dependencies, this can inform internal decision-making and ultimately investor decision-making as well. Over time, these examples can also provide really important proof points for future policy. As companies better engage with their externalities and start to internalize them, that gives some great examples for how we can make this more of a systemic solution. So within our True Value of Food work, we have several different pillars of engagement. So we through knowledge sharing, through developing standards, through coalitions and partnerships and advocacy, we try to advance this measurement and valuation of externalities within the companies that are engaged in this project. With regard to knowledge sharing, we facilitate peer-to-peer exchange so that those companies that are really just beginning this journey are able to learn from other companies that have been more involved for longer. We promote the use of existing methodologies such as the Natural Capital Protocol and the Social and Human Capital Protocol, really encourage companies to use these tools to help measure and value their impacts and their dependencies. But also we're really excited about another tool that's on the way. It's the Tea Agri-Food Guidelines for Business, which we are looking to support companies in their engagement with this framework which is really focused on measurement and valuation of impacts and dependencies for food and agriculture companies. With regard to standard setting, we're working with the Food Civvy Initiative, which is housed at the University of Oxford. And that work is centered on improving impact valuation methodologies, looking at the broader sort of true cost accounting for food systems. In a couple of weeks, it'll come out, the team there will come out with an interesting report. It's quite technical, looking at comparable and practical monetary valuation approaches for the food system. And this year, we're looking at the development of impact pathways related to very specific topics for food system actors. Within this standard setting box as well, we are working on developing generally accepted accounting principles, environmentally generally accepted accounting principles. EGAP is the nickname. And this piece of work is looking at, it's trying to address the specific need for natural capital-based accounting and environmental reporting standards. We're intending to create more of a generalizable standard that can help integrate both the social and environmental perspectives in food system and agriculture system accounting. So then I'll jump up to the box, the coalitions and partnerships. In this space, last year we convened a food systems dialogue for investors, which was meant to bring together the companies that are engaging in this impact evaluation work with the investor community that could use this information to inform their decision making. It was quite an interesting event, and we are, as a result of that success, we're organizing 3 more this year. There was some delay due to COVID, but we have 3 scheduled for this coming fall, and we're looking forward to taking those conversations forward. And then we also have partnered with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food and support their true cost accounting accelerator work, looking at the harmonization of impact valuation methodologies. And in general, with all of this work, we're really looking to drive towards convergence so that there's a greater level of consistency and approaches and methods that companies use to do impact valuation. And this ties into this final bit on advocacy, which I think we agree that this impact valuation can be a really important lever for driving the food system transformation. So we will be pushing for that, and we see, I think, the Food System Summit next year as a really important milestone to bring this work forward. So I'll just jump to the next slide, which highlights the companies that are engaged in this work. The 4 on top, Nestle, Olam, Syngenta, and Yara, are really the leaders of this work within WBCSD. They've stepped up as co-leaders and helped drive sort of our direction and strategy of what we're trying to accomplish. And all of the other companies on this slide have been really integral partners, collaborators as we take it forward. So I just want to thank them for their involvement and engagement. And with that, I will hand the floor over to Ravi from Olam, who will share how Olam has approached multi-capital accounting and made some of what I've just talked about a bit more real and practical. So Ravi, over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Ravi Abhiwardana. I'm a manager within the Finance for Sustainability department within Olam, and I'm a chartered accountant by trade. So over the next few slides, I'm going to provide you with some context behind the formation of Finance for Sustainability department, then provide you with some understanding of what F4S does. before going into our tool called OLAM's Integrated Impact Statement, where I'll be showcasing some of the results and insights on our cocoa supply chain before wrapping it up with the way forward. So next slide, please. Yeah. So from a strategic priority and roadmap perspective, OLAM is a food and agri commodity company listed on the Singaporean Stock Exchange, and there are some key trends which really play out within our sector. Consumers want a product which is right for them, but also right for the planet and right for the producers. How they live and consume and how it's produced as well. And this naturally has an impact on our strategic priorities and enablers. And you'll notice that the enablers, there are 4 of them, one of them being sustainability. And these ultimately allow us to drive towards 4 key business priorities, which obviously are quite financial in their focus. Next slide, please. So from an external perspective, investors' preferences are changing, with investors recognizing that financial performance is linked to non-financial performance. So the pie charts on the left state that financial institutions and investors are increasingly expecting more and more disclosures, especially with regard to risk and recognizing that the link to revenue and returns. And the graph on the right, very much showcases that, of the top global 100 sustainable companies outperform those who are not by about just over 30%. Next slide, please. So for OLAM to really create value over the long term, we very much need to actively manage a broad set of drivers beyond financials. So OLAM's current market capitalization is hovering around $4.8 billion. However, there are many underlying invisible non-reported value which very much support those financial capitals, and those capitals are detailed to the right of the pyramid. So you've got natural, social and human capital, as well as manufactured, intellectual and intangible. The 3 coloured circles are very much key capitals for OLAM. Next slide, please. So within OLAM, a key question for us is, how can we establish a financial link to sustainability through the development of a decision-making tool at profit centre level and increase our impact on the ground? Next slide, please. From an OLAM perspective, capital accounting is very important for 4 reasons. 1, it uncovers hidden costs and benefits, which are really important to very much future-proof our business and drive resilience going forward, but also to understand those invisible capitals, which don't necessarily flow into a set of financial statements when you pick them up, and they don't really provide some, any understanding of like the dependencies and impacts which our financials, which we report on a quarterly and a yearly basis, are very much dependent upon. And this is really, really important to showcase like the risk and opportunities in OLAM reporting these hidden costs and benefits, otherwise known as externalities, and how by internalising these externalities, they can have an impact on our business. And the 4th one is to do with ESG metrics reported to banks, investors and other stakeholders, how we can inform them via our bottom-up approach to externality reporting. Next slide, please. And one more. Thanks. So following all of this in this context, a new department has been created within OLAM called Finance for Sustainabilities. And the key driver for this and to take this initiative forward of reporting on externalities, but also understanding the internalisation of those externalities from an OLAM perspective is F4S. And there are three real key drivers. Internalisation of externalities, bridging that gap between finance and sustainability concepts, which are often short and long term, and supporting our strategic financial business decision making going forward. And we're going to be doing this for all 17 of our business units at profit centre level, and also to provide some form of accountants culture and mindset to all of this as well. So this department is housed within finance. This department, it reports directly to the CFO, and one of the key challenges to multi-capital accounting is always just buy-in, and having Rishi Kalra, the group CFO, buy into this and create this department, it really has opened up fantastic opportunities for us to scale and embed this sort of thinking. And this thinking is to, very much monetize our impacts on the environment and the communities which we operate in, but also the individuals that we employ. So you can find further details on our website. So yeah, next slide, please. Great. So this section is going to delve a little bit more deeper into the integrated impact statement. And the integrated impact statement is a multi-capital approach within OLAM, which allows the business units to manage multiple different capitals which support our business, but often invisible. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 12 business units, and via this tool, we will be able to provide my finance colleagues and other departments with that, visibility on those capitals, and allow decision makers to actually manage a broader set of drivers just beyond financials. So next slide, please. Cheers. So over the next couple of slides, I'm just going to go through the integrated impact statement. So it's a three-step approach, and the integrated impact statement was developed internally and externally audited. The internal task force included the likes of the risk department, human resources, finance and sustainability, and was chaired by the group CFO, Rishi Kalra. And the IIS will facilitate and support decision making so as to protect our business and ensure reliability of sourcing and long-term value going forward. This statement very much complements traditional financial reporting by presenting our non-financial performance in an easy to read profit and loss and balance sheet for my finance colleagues, so then they can easily understand different levers which are play from a capital accounting perspective, and very much understand the hidden impacts, whether positive or negative, on the decisions which they make from an investment perspective, and allow us to actually measure and compare the different capitals, and also allow us to actually enhance accountability and stewardship and drive towards better insights from a risk and opportunities perspective. So the profit and loss is split over two steps. The first step is step one. So as per current IFRS, certain line items are deemed as costs in relation to natural capital, human capital and social capital, for example. However, they are actually, in fact, direct contributions, such as how much we have paid over and above minimum wage, what is our contribution to social investments within our supply chain, and how much have we actually paid towards environmental matters. The second step is split between a profit and loss and a balance sheet, and what you have here is a step 2A, profit and loss, and this very much goes into externality reporting. providing our business with an understanding of the hidden costs and benefits associated with our operations, which are currently just not reported within conventional financial reporting. Next slide, please. The second part of step 2B, is the balance sheet. So once again, it reports on externalities, but interestingly, it actually looks at our dependencies on the stock. So what is our overall stock value within a particular location which we're operating within? And this is really, really important, because then we can match it to planetary boundaries, for example, and really test whether our operations are sustainable or not. And finally, the third step is to do with a risk and opportunity statement. So of the externalities which we're reporting, how much of an impact do those externalities have an impact on our financials, which is really important. And this really much, it's full circle and really important for the business. Next slide, please. So over the next 3 slides, I'm going to focus on the integrated impact statement, natural capital profit and loss, 2019 Cocoa Insights, which are visible on our recent annual report. And I'm just going to walk through some associated hidden costs and benefits. So on this slide, we've got natural capital, greenhouse gases, and what we show here is a selection of farmer groups within our cocoa supply chain. And you'll notice that on the far right-hand side, farmer group 11, this has the biggest net impact, net GHG societal impact. And this is primarily driven by historical land use change. And this information provides our business units with, in this case, cocoa, with a clear understanding of the different farmer groups and how they actually play out from a natural capital GHG perspective, and help that business unit to actually prioritize additional investments into reducing those natural capital impacts. One way of doing this is by increasing planned level of agroforestry within certain farmer groups, such as over the 773,000 trees and forest trees which were planted in 2019 in our OLAM managed program supplier network of over 185 farmer group cooperatives within Ivory Coast, for example. Next slide, please. So this slide details water consumption. So water consumption here is split between the impact that water consumed, which is taken out of the environment and goes into our processing units, has on both an impact on the environment, but also on human health, because human health is impacted because there's less water to go around, so water scarcity issues. And this is really interesting, a very interesting information for our cocoa business unit. So in order for them to actually reduce the water-related natural capital costs, it will require local watershed knowledge. And it's not all about driving operational efficiencies with regards to just water intensity. So on the previous slide, we used a global value on GHG emissions because it's global in nature. But from a water perspective, you really need to take into consideration the context-specific values. And this is what we've been able to do from all of our Tier 1 cocoa processing units. And what you have here is that for every $1 of hidden water costs, there was created 591 meters cubed of water was consumed in one of the processing units, when compared to another processing unit which only required 461 meters cubed of water consumption to generate the same value. And this is really important because for our business unit, that they really need to take into watershed context to actually reduce the water impact going forward. Next slide, please. So this slide focuses on natural capital cropland ecosystem services benefit. So, all ecosystems provide benefits to our environment, and cropland is a benefit to an agricultural company such as ourselves. For example, in 2018, Olam required around 2.5 billion bees, costing our business $8.5 million to pollinate some of our estates. So ecosystem services, those hidden values, are very important to Olam from a financial perspective, and it's really important that we uncover this. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the key challenges to really embedding this within a business is, just getting buy-in. And Rishi Katra has bought into this and created this department, and he sees that there is very much a need for his financial teams to very much have a numerical link between actions on the ground and their impact, and dependencies on the capitals, and also the impact on our financials. So I'm just going to go through the way forward before handing over. So for way forward, we have been, the Finance for Sustainability Department has been tasked with completing a natural capital assessment for our entire business. So we're starting off in very much a staggered approach, but yeah, the appetite from the top is there. And over the course of the year, we will be disclosing further information of our multi-capital accounting approach, covering human and social capital, and their insights on our website, and also via the True Value of Food work stream, which Olam is part of via WBCSD. And the third element is collaboration. So it's really important that, Olam, via its bottom-up approach and the depth of data which we have, is important to actually share with stakeholders, whether it be via our sustainability platform called At Source or others. And it's really important that we're able to collaborate with not only other corporates operating within this space, but also the public sector as well, so as to inform policy making. Policy making around this is really important. It's really important that farmers are brought in on this journey and incentivized in the ways of like how they can reduce their externalities on their farming practices going forward. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. So I'm happy to join the next chapter on externalities in the Food System Summit. My name is Claire Kaske-Cook, and I'm Director for Policy and Advocacy at WBCSD. First of all, before starting, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you, Ravi, for this overview of what Olam is doing on integrated impact statements and insight you are gathering while doing this work. It actually provides a really great introduction to the section that I'm going to be talking briefly on externalities and the Food System Summit, before passing on to Jamie Morrison, who will go into more details. WBCSD is happy to be working together with its members and partners in support of the Food System Summit, in particular to help define the role of the private sector in helping transform our food systems to be more sustainable and resilient. We are planning to help elevate the voice of the private sector to share both what kind of commitments business can make to help us achieve the SDGs, but also what kind of structures and changes need to happen on a policy level to make this change feasible and impactful on a large scale. There are going to be other food and nature-related events happening later this year and next year, many in anticipation of next year's Food System Summit, where we will be sharing more details on those, including a timeline. And ultimately, we're really excited to see so much action and interest from the private sector. If you're interested in learning more about WBCSD's role in this, please do let me know. Companies are increasingly looking at incorporating holistic environmental, social, and government performance and review into their regular Enterprise Risk Management, which is a great evolution, although not happening enough, as we'd heard earlier. We're nonetheless happy to see this progress, especially as this is a key step in helping transform food systems and will be a good pathway into the UN Food System Summit next year. One of the key additional benefits that often doesn't get mentioned that much of engaging in this work and understanding more around the hidden costs of our global food and land use systems is that it can help companies anticipate legislative developments and changes and adapt their business strategy accordingly. Creating a positive financial link to sustainability is an impressive accomplishment and aligns business profit with positive impact. However, there are many more benefits of engagement around external risk links to increasing business understanding of how other stakeholders, in particular policymakers, civil society, and ultimately government decision makers, will try to create and implement legislation that addresses some of the underlying negative issues surrounding our current food and land use system. And ultimately, it helps anticipate legislative developments and position positively. This understanding can be a key driver for strategic decision-making on investments and partnerships, for example, ensuring long-term license to operate, and also help drive strategic external engagement from a policy perspective. So just to summarize from a conceptual perspective, external engagement surrounding externalities and ESG risk can help drive business decision-making around long-term investment decisions that would need increased capital spend, for example, on plant buildings and infrastructure investments, but also influence short-term decision-making and identify new collaboration opportunities, such as, for example, working with farmers on crop rotations. Finally, being aware of positive legislative developments can help business voice its concerns and hopes around pending changes. For example, how they could impact local employment and production patterns, and the importance of taking a systems perspective and understanding unintended consequences of possible legislative changes. So with that, I will be happy to pass on to Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I still see you on the screen, so I'm not sure if I'm on just yet. But can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, definitely. I'm just going off. Yes.
Great. So thank you, Claire, and also thanks very much to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development for hosting this important session, and also for the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the Food Systems Summit Secretariat team. What I'd like to do is just to share some thoughts on how the process towards the Food Systems Summit, which will take place in 2021, can be used to accelerate and support action towards internalising externalities, and particularly what the role of the private sector could and should be in working towards this priority. As Scarlett indicated in her presentation, this concept of internalising externalities could be a game changer in the sort of process towards the transformation of food systems. Tackling the hidden costs of food systems and turning food systems into a net positive contributor is clearly not an opportunity to be missed. And I think with the COVID-19 crisis, which has revealed many of the fragilities intrinsic to contemporary food systems, this provides us an extra focus. The COVID crisis has also shown how quickly many, if not all parts of the private sector has been able to respond to the many significant disruptions. But at the same time, we should also not lose sight of some of the fundamental longer-term challenges to food systems and the need to factor these into the responses, the shorter-term responses. For example, despite living in an age of unprecedented wealth and progress, where we produce much more food than we need to feed everybody, poverty and hunger remain entrenched, and obesity with its associated health and economic cost is rising. Food systems, as you'll be aware, contribute up to 29% of all greenhouse gas emissions, including 44% of methane, and have been a key driver in biodiversity loss. At present, we're facing 1 million species being threatened with extinction. So with the Secretary General of the United Nations call that the recovery from this multifaceted crisis we face, both short term with COVID, but longer term with the climate emergency, for example, we need to find our way out with a different way of doing business, where societies are more equal, inclusive and sustainable. And at the heart of this will be creating a strong policy framework that supports the internalization of the externalities, which have been illustrated very clearly today, and providing the right tools for businesses and other agencies to work together within that framework to build back better. And we want to try to use the summit opportunity to change the narrative and elevate our understanding around food systems and food system transformation. But we also want to initiate the process that will guarantee meaningful and joined up commitments, and that will hold all stakeholders accountable to those commitments long after the summit has passed. The summit, as has been alluded to, is a moment in time which we're using to seek convergence of many different initiatives, but it's certainly not an end in itself. So turning to a bit more detail of the summit itself, and particularly the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. The outcomes which are listed in a moment will require a much higher level of concerted action and collaboration between the private sector in all its diversity, government, civil society, in fact the whole ecosystem of food system actors. What we want to try to do is to create a summit for everybody with the following very broad outcomes. Firstly, to raise awareness on how central food systems will be in our achievement of the 2030 agenda and the urgency of food system transformation in accelerating process towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. But also, and I think this reflects the fact that it's not to say that actors aren't already taking action in what we would conceive as being or perceive as being the right direction. But often these actions are not particularly well joined up and don't result in significant movement in the direction that we would like to see. So another key outcome of the summit will be to try to align stakeholders around a common understanding of a food system framework, which provides a foundation for that more coordinated and concerted action. Thirdly, recognizing or increasing recognition that governance of food systems at all levels needs to be inclusive and will require some sort of innovation in the way that we govern food systems and the way that actors participate in the governance of those systems. Another outcome that we're sort of structuring the process towards the summit around is to motivate and empower stakeholders to actively and appropriately support food system transformation at all levels through the development of evidence and analysis. And I'll come back to that point in a bit more depth in a moment. And finally, and obviously important, how we catalyze, accelerate and scale action to support the transformation to more inclusive, resilient and environmentally sustainable food systems. Again, picking up on this point that many actors, whether they be producers, private sector actors along the chain, consumers, are already taking significant actions, but it's bringing that together that will be critical. So what we're looking for is a solutions summit where we focus on driving positive change. The summit itself will clearly be framed around the Sustainable Development Goals, but the idea is to operationalize it through a series of action tracks. And these action tracks, which are under development and which I hope we will be able to align around as we move the process forward, will also be operationalized in turn through a series of cross-cutting enablers, which would include, for example, finance, science and technology, evidence, all of which will be vital to delivery of actions within and across the action tracks as they're defined. Coming back to the sort of the evidence side, the knowledge and policy side, which I've got a particular interest in within the Summit team. What we've come to understand is that if we're going to have ambition within these action tracks, they need to be substantive. They need to be underpinned by independently reviewed substantive evidence and information. And I think what we need is a process which brings together the wide range of inputs that are already available and under development, and also the tools, the wealth of knowledge, the innovations, the know-how that resides within the private sector. We need these to help policymakers to understand and to work through the inevitable trade-offs that they will face in determining how best to incentivize the internalization of externalities. And I thought Rodney's intervention in relation to clustering and levers for change was particularly helpful in this respect, as indeed was Ravi's example of the use of a capital accounting tool in illuminating the natural capital impacts of alternative practices, all of which help us to provide tools and methodologies to help us think through the best way forward in terms of creating the policy framework within which to internalize externalities. So as we move forward the process towards the summit, we're looking for new and deeper partnership with all constituencies. We need to bring in the government leaders, private sector leaders, civil society leaders to agree on the best mechanisms for internalizing externalities as one of the high-level outcomes of the summit. And as hinted at before, the summit is only a moment in time that we will be using to bring alignment to the numerous initiatives and hopefully transform the level of ambition that we're seeing already initiated today. The private sector itself will be key in bringing that high level of ambition. Recalling the Paris Climate Summit, business leaders stepped up on carbon pricing and many other issues to help to de-risk the decisions that were under negotiation and that contributed very much to the final agreement that we saw coming out of Paris. And we will very much need you to be doing the same, bring the same high level of ambition to the summit, and also creating the demand for a high level of ambition from other partners, whether government, civil society, and others. So thank you for this opportunity. We see this very much as a start of our ongoing work together on this agenda as we continue to engage through the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Thanks very much.
Jamie, thank you so much for that great summary of what the plans are as we head forward into the Food Systems Summit and how the Secretariat and those planning are really working to shift the dialogue and, more importantly, shift the action on the steps we need to take for the Food Systems Summit. Clea, thanks so much for the setup that you did for that discussion as well, and some of the outlines regarding the underlying policy needs that we have to be able to activate and really put our joint collective voices behind to see some of those shifts take place. Ravi, I'm always so impressed when you take us through the work that Olam has done to really incorporate the costs of externalities, the way you've put that into your aggregated financial reporting and some of the things that Olam has learned through that process. Thank you for sharing that with us. Emily, the work that you're helping to lead with so many partners, including Teabag for Food and GAFF and Oxford University and others on the true value of food work is super important. So thank you for laying that out, because it's through that type of change in how we consider and standardize the methodologies and begin to drive investor awareness into how to rate the performance of companies, whether they are or are not incorporating and reporting on those externalities, is going to be the type of shift that we're going to need to see. Rodney, your overview of risks and how we need to be looking at them quite differently and managing for them quite differently is always really inspiring. And Scarlett, thanks for kicking us off with what are the costs that we need to really look into and begin to unpack in many of the ways that have been outlined and discussed. So thank you for that. We've had a really robust discussion going on in the chat. It's been great to see. Thanks for everyone who has posed those questions and comments, and for each of our team members who've provided that feedback. We have just a few more minutes here before we wind down at the half-hour point. Are there any additional questions that haven't come up yet that you'd like to be sure that we raise and try to cover here? The chat will be part of what we share, so everybody will be able to see the rich dialogue that has taken place there, and the comments and the responses and the links. Several of the links mentioned will also be shared as part of the follow-up. Again, we'll be sharing this session, the recording of the webinar, the slides, and a number of the resources referenced to all of the registered participants. So please look forward to receiving that. Anyone have anything else that they'd like to raise or flag for our attention? Giving just a moment to see if any hands are being raised. Okay, well, what I'd like to do is, again, thank our speakers for taking the time to share your insights and knowledge with us today. Thank all of you who participated, especially those who've shared your input with us in the chat, and to all who can take away from this learnings and apply those back where you work. That's how we accelerate the change. So we thank you very much for your participation here today. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.